This video is going to provide additional examples of how halos can be removed from HDR images. If you haven't done the first original one, I recommend you do that first. This one will be in quite as much detail, but we will look at how it is affected by different images you start with. So to start this, if you will go out to the files that came with getting rid of halos and open the two remaining we're going to work on. One is called Light Lights 2, Bright Lights 3, and the other is Bright Lights 3, Halos 2. And if you get them, you'll have this one with the halo along the edge of the scene, and the other one is one that has the lighthouse on the building. So we're going to start first with the scene with that bright effect where the tree line meets a very light part of the sky. Just remember that in HDR, if you have sudden changes from dark edges to light edges, it's quite easy to end up with a halo effect that you might like to diminish. And this technique will help you to cut back on that in a very gentle, gradual way. So in the other one, I told you how you can go about trying out different actions panels that are to see which selection is going to zoom in on the halos. If you aren't going to do that, in most cases, you get at the halos pretty well through the Bright Lights 3 selection. And in this case, we'll start with that, and then I'll show you how you can do a little additional work on a different selection. So, having decided that the luminosity selection will be Bright Lights 3, we're going to go and duplicate this background. So if you will go ahead and either Command and Control J or go to the Layer Duplicate Layer choice, you will get a copy of that background. We're going to be working on this layer and leaving the original background untouched. It's quite often important, but it's particularly important if when you get done, you want to adjust the strength of what you just did. That opacity slider is available for every layer you create except for the original background layer. So we're working on a duplicate, and we're going to change the blend mode from normal to multiply. And of course that will darken the entire image. We're then going to add a layer mask. So if you go up to the icon there that says add layer mask, and before we use this layer, I want to totally hide the effect. So if I take a white mask which is showing the effect and I turn the white mask black, we'll hide it. So to hide that, to turn that mask from white to black, it's Control or Command I for invert. So now you're back with the original image, but in that layer above, hidden below that black mask, is that darkening multiply effect. And what we're going to do is decide that we only want to see it where the halos are in the image. So for that reason, we have to know how to use a Tony Kuiper selection that will select the brightness of those halos. And we already said that Bright Lights 3 as a selection will help to zero in on the brighter part of the image and will be able to reduce that brightness. So if you will come to the Action panel, and you want to be in the TK Selections group so that you are not setting up another layer, you're simply choosing the selections that go with Bright Lights 3. So once it's selected, you then play that selection, the little triangle button. And in this case, you don't see many crawling ants. And that is because the crawling ants are only in the area that's going to have at least a 50% correction. The other areas in here will have less of a sharp, dramatic correction. So we're going to start with this as our first one. If those ants bother you, you hide them with Command or Control H for hide. The selection is still there, we just don't have to look at the ants. And then, in order to reveal part of this multiply effect, we're going to have to cut a hole through the black with white. So we're going to get a brush and use white for the foreground color. And then I cautioned you to start with some average opacity, somewhere in the mid-range, because you don't know before you start how strong the change is going to be. You can always increase the opacity or repeat your brush strokes to get more of an effect. But if you overdo it at the beginning, you've got to go back and do it again. So I'm taking the brush, and I want that brush to be plenty big enough so that it's bigger than the area I want to affect. And I must look over here and say, oh, it's the mask I want to work on. Quite often when we do this, we find out that the front or the thumbnail, which is the actual layer, is selected, and that won't let us paint through on the mask. So be sure your mask is the one selected and that you have the appropriate brush. Then you go over the area where it's too bright and you go along, and one application at about 50% didn't do much. I'll try a second layer at 50%. You can always stop and see how much you've reduced it by hiding your work. That layer is where all the work is. Click the eye, visibility eye, and you can see we have reduced it somewhat. By this time, I realize that I don't need the lowered opacity. What's working here, I can raise that all the way to 100% because I've discovered the effect is very gentle. So now I'm going to go back over this again at 100% and bring that down as much as I can by this method. So let's hide our work again. We really have brought it down. And you might like to leave it there. The glow belongs there. But what we don't want is the extreme sharpness of the glow where it reaches that ridge of trees in the back. So at this point, I'm probably happy leaving that much glow there. But if you did the first one, you know if you want to reduce it some more, all you do at this point is add a new layer, create a new layer, and remember, your selection is still there even though you've hidden it. Prove it to yourself. Bring it back. Command or Control H. So we still have a selection in effect, which is important. And I'm going to paint on this new layer with a very low opacity black to darken the remaining glow. So come to the brush, and if you're going to darken, you must go back to black. And I want a very low opacity, 10% or less. So it'll be a very gentle. And remember, I'm painting through the luminosity selection. So I'm going to come over to this side, and I'm going to come down and go over that once more. And the only place I might use a little more is in this corner in here. I'll do one more stroke in that corner. And if I want to know what did the last brush strokes do, I go up to that new layer and I hide it. Can you see how it brought down some of the brightness a bit more and left more of an even glow? I always feel it's important to say how much you reduce this glow is a personal aesthetic decision. You didn't need to bring that down more. I wanted you to know how to do it. Remember, you must learn what to do and when to stop because you should have a concept of what you would like to present, and you're trying to work toward your image and how you want your image to look. So I'm doing things to show you technique. It's up to you to decide when to use it and how much to use it. So that has added that one and corrected it. So I'm going to close this one. I did put down that if you wanted to, you could have chosen Lights 2 and applied more over the mask, because Lights 2 would have affected more of the bright area. What I wanted was to mostly bring down that brightest area, and Lights 2 would not bring down the brighter area. So I chose to add a layer and simply darken it with a very low opacity black brush. Let's close it and don't save it so it's around for you to practice with. And this is the final image. This is a very delicate image that doesn't have a really severe glow. And if you decide you like it the way it is, you use it that way. But I want to show you that you don't have to have severe halos to use this technique. And I've also noticed that I think this yellow bit here caught too much light, and I think I would like to bring that down also. So my same method that reduces the halo can be used anywhere else on an image where you'd like to reduce it a bit. So let's remember our procedure. I want to have a copy of the background layer, duplicate layer. I then want to change the blend mode of this new layer to multiply. And then I want to hide all of that darkening. So to do that, I'm going to add a mask, and it will come in as white. I can then create that mask and change it to black by inverting it. And that means Control on Windows, Command on Mac, and I for invert. I might mention to you something that perhaps would be useful to know. I'm going to undo that last step and tell you that if I want to get a black mask originally, I don't have to do it in 2 steps. If instead of just clicking on Add a Layer Mask, if I hold the Alt or Option key down when I click, I get a black mask. So that's just another way to get a mask black without having to invert it. So I'm back with the image just like it started out. And I want to paint to reveal some of that multiply effect over just the halo section, which is the brightest section of the image. So according to this one, I've said, let's try the Bright Lights 3 selection. So if you will come down to the TK Selections folder, choose Bright Lights 3, and play the selection with the play button. You can hardly see any crawling ants. That's because the effect isn't extremely intense. Remember, the crawling ants show the area that's at least 50% selected. The only crawling ants I really see are mostly down in this corner down here. If you want to see what the selection is going to look like, we will work with it and then we will look at the mask. So let's start with the selection in effect. We want to cut a hole in the black mask, so click on the mask. And then we're going to paint white at a low, not too heavy an opacity, and it will help us to cut back on some of the glow along the dark edges of the lighthouse. So I have the brush, excuse me, I have a white color, and I'm going to make the opacity somewhere in the mid-range near 50%. Now I'm going to paint on the mask, be sure the mask is selected, right over the area of the halo. And as I do, I will bring down that bright area. I didn't hide the ants because there were so few, but I'm going to hide those right now. And notice that I might like to lower this corner more than the rest, so I simply paint again over this corner to lower it. In this case, that's all it really needed to get rid of that glowing effect. If you want to see what you were doing, we're going to show the mask in place of the image. Alt or Option key, click on the mask, and this shows you how little we affected that. Can you see where it was affected? Mostly down here. But we felt it looked all right. If it looks all right, you don't have to do it again. There wasn't much to bring down. But I said I would like to also bring down that edge right there. And that edge is partly caught in the selection. So if I have my white brush, and I realize I could probably keep that 50%, and I come here and I go across that lightly once, I brought that down just a bit where I like it better. And of course, I'm going to see the before and after. So go to the layer where your work is and hide the layer by clicking on the eyeball. This is where it was before, and this is where it is after. It's a very subtle change. I wanted you to know that halos don't have to be extreme for you to consider tapping them down a little bit or tamping them down. You don't need to have a very obtrusive halo to try this. Remember, if your selection is only lightly affecting the area and you are using an opacity brush that isn't too high, you can make a gentle change which may improve it. And of course, you always have the right to decide, do I even want to reduce them, or do I like the way they exist? So here's another example to give you as a practice. So I'm going to close it and not save it so that you can use it again on your own to practice with it.